Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. We're all living in a decade of action, as the UN have labeled the 2020s. And my paper is about broadly time, emotion, action, and how we can better understand the green acceleration. So we see across organizations, across the globe, more and more corporates are setting out what they themselves call ambitious goals. We have based in the Nordic, a dairy producer. We have IKEA, the global brand, recently launched a new program to accelerate suppliers. We've seen pharma company Novo Nordisk do the same. We've seen within shipping, Maersk, global business, set out to create so-called zero carbon shipping. And we also see some of the really big players such as Nike and Starbucks and Unilever and so on, Maersk included here. There's an obvious agenda here, and that's what I'm trying to understand, how these organizations convince actors, stakeholders to take action through a use of a timely emotion. My name is Marcus Lantz. I work at Copenhagen Business School, currently working on a project at the Center for Organization and Time, and I'm looking much forward to seeing you in real online context soon. All right, so just very briefly, my approach to studying and understanding the concept of future emotion evolves around three strands of theory, as you can read in the paper if you have the chance to read it. So one is focusing on time, taking the event-based understanding of time that we know from the work of Readiness and also Readiness and Schultz. And what's important in relation to emotion is that the ongoing, the becoming, this transformation of working both from the present towards distant pasts or futures, and that also working from distant past or futures towards the present, that takes place simultaneously, what Thor Hannes and Michael Schultz have recently coined as temporal translation. So I try to bridge that with different works on emotion. An important aspect is that I take as a key assumption that emotion and cognition, so reason and affect, they work in tandem, and they affect action in tandem. So emotions are subject to thought, and thoughts become interwoven in emotion. We know that, for example, on some of the work that James Jasper has done on emotions in social movements. And importantly, emotions motivate actors to take action because these very emotions underline that the situation is worthy of attention and action. So we come to understand through our emotions that we need to take action. Whether that emotion then is reasonable, that's a completely different question. And last but not least, I draw on theories from the framing literature, specifically the process framing, originating from Goffman and through the works of Benford and Snow, and specifically the so-called vocabularies of motive that Benford have written about: severity, urgency, efficacy, and propriety. So these are, as you can read in the paper, these are the three bodies, very broad bodies of literature that I try to combine. And where does that put us? Well, building on recent calls, for example, in a very recent conversation piece in Journal of Management Studies, Sven Kunich and co-authors underline that we studying time and temporality need a better understanding of the emotional dynamics that inform whether actors frame a disruptive event like the pandemic as a threat or opportunity. I can add a potentially disruptive event as climate change, and in certain parts of the world it is by far already very disruptive. We see in current affairs that Canada has been hit by extreme waves of heat. But König and co-authors underline that the effective dimension of time is a question of particular relevance for scholars of strategy and entrepreneurship. So, let's say, future-oriented strands of studies. In another quite recent paper on distant futures, Augustine and co-authors, including Klaus Weber, underlined that a moral and ideological grounding makes distant futures deeply emotional. And of course, that has implications for how people mobilize to act on them. And last but not least, the works by Daniel Nyberg and Christopher Wright and others connects sustainability, CSR, and framing. And Nyberg and co-authors underline that framing becomes the politics of interweaving and disrupting time in making pasts and futures support the present. And what I try to add is by bringing in emotions, but emotions understood as interweaving with cognition. So not only heated upheavals of affect. We can better understand how such framing actually works. And I underline in the paper that an appeal to emotion appeals to time and timely action. So again, based on the assumption that future emotion can be legitimate reason for judgment and action, appeals to time, whether we should do something right now, whether we're doing it now in order to move towards future goals. Such appeals to time are appeals to the interaction between past and future-oriented emotions and how these make the present worthy of attention and action. And the model that I propose, and it's still very early in the making, the future emotion of action readiness, the FEAR model, conceptualizes what I call vocabularies of emotion in action, in order to account for the dynamism of a situated view on time that Thor Hannes and Michael Schultz, among others, have worked on and called for further theorizing on. And last but not least, what I believe this paper can add, and why it's important, is that it can describe and also theorize the type of bold action needed by advancing our understanding of how emotions interact and evolve as an ongoing negotiated organizing of temporality that constitutes compelling reasons to act in the present. So time and emotion interact, and it's through that interaction and that becoming that we take action. Thanks very much for tuning in. I'm looking much forward to meeting you, although online, and further discussing how time and temporality can play an even bigger role in organization studies.